right, so this time we are in the climb. John, happy to have you back here, man.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's fun times.
Hell yeah. So today we are going to hit a little bit of a history kind of track right now. So we didn't really plan this out beforehand. John is going to basically talk about any topic he wants. He can choose to go as deep into it as he wants.
As deep as my knowledge allows.
Yeah, and that's really what it's at. Like, honestly, when it comes to history, there's always stuff that no one knows what truly happened. Like, there's only so much that was recorded, written down, anecdotal. Like, whenever you're reviewing data sheets and really making hypothesis, that's all history is. It's our best guess at what it is based off of eyewitness reports, which a lot of times is written by the winning side.
So that's where it comes down, because there's different levels to it, because there's historical fact and historical theory. So historical fact would be like the Allies won World War II. There's plenty of documentation like supporting it outside of just the claim that they won. There's external supporting documents. So that is what it would be considered a historical fact. A historical theory would be the development of MIG welding won World War II.
Gotcha.
Because it was developed at that time frame in order to more quickly mass produce tanks, planes, and everything else, because stick welding, you got to stop, change the stick out, restart, everything like that. With MIG welding, if you can put up with the heat and you're laying down a good bead, keep going. You can just run it continuously.
Yeah.
So that would be a historical theory versus a historical fact.
Oh yeah. So today, what are you gonna bring up? Like, do you have anything in particular that maybe you've learned about recently, or something that just really tickles your fancy whenever you're putting on that history hat?
So there's plenty that I've learned about recently that I've not done deep dives hard into.
Okay.
So I can only speak on like skimming the surface. Like you just asked me about like the Odyssey, which I believe was a 30-year time frame, because the Odyssey is not just coming back. It's actually like going to the Trojan War, which I believe took 10 years. The Trojan War, which then took 10 years. And then the coming back. Or it might be the
yeah, those are two books. Yep, those are the two books. So the first ancient poem by Homer was the Iliad, and that covers the Trojan War.
Yeah.
And then that has kind of everyone there. When you see Achilles,
yeah, you get
Agamemnon, like
everybody's there.
Yeah, Hector, all the big players. And there's a lot of gods. That's one thing that people don't realize, that from the movies they watched, they don't include the gods, but in the actual Greek story,
the gods are present.
They're the entire
They're
way
active.
Yeah.
The main issue when people are trying to interpret it nowadays, because again, like, they've actually dug up where Troy would have been and have found a city there. So it's leaning more towards that the Trojan War itself was something that actually happened, regardless of who we claim may or may not have been there. This appears to be a true historical battle. But with Homer writing poems, waxing poetically about history, much the same way we would now about our ancient history, us talking about the Romans, essentially, because the distance between Homer and the events of the Trojan War is a large span of time. It wasn't like 2,000 years, but even if it was only 500 years, then at that time frame, with the technology, modes of transportation, written literature, anything of that nature, you were dealing mostly in oral traditions. And so when you're dealing with mostly oral traditions and you've got a handful of burgeoning languages. Like Sanskrit is ancient as hell. Everything there in Mesopotamia.
Yeah, the Sumerians.
Yep, the Sumerians. Well, and Sumerians get a little bit more eastward than that, but you get down into what is now like present-day Iraq and things of that nature. You also wind up with like cuneiform, which there's a guy that does fantastic videos about cuneiform. Dr. Irving Finkel, I believe his name is. He is hysterical, and he's a wiry-haired old guy with a dry British sense of humor. But he's fantastic about like his craft, which has become his passion for his life, working there, British Museum type thing. But you've got these languages that we're still decoding to this day, and we're still learning of other burgeoning written languages, because like the Native American peoples, we're dating them back to like 10,000 years ago, but they didn't write shit down. It's like they had no written language. There's actually stories told about like the talking leaves and how they were not a good thing, and they were bad, they were evil, and we don't trust them. Which goes into all of their spiritual beliefs and things of that nature. But back to the Greek side of things, they would add the gods that they believed existed into their stories to explain the weather phenomenon or how well we did in war and things of that nature, the same way that we romanticize other parts of our cultures and histories. They weren't really there necessarily, but our belief in them might make us fight stronger, make us do better, and then we win. So yeah, like that's, the ancient Greeks were astonishingly intelligent for the level of technology they had. Like it just, the Bronze era, smelting metals and combining metals together to create bronze, because bronze is not just naturally occurring in and of itself. I want to say brass is copper and tin metallurgically. I don't remember what bronze is made out of, but copper is involved. But it's like that was the peak of technology.
Yeah.
And someone had to figure that out. It's like, you don't figure that out just banging two rocks together. You gotta have brain cells moving around doing shit.
Well, there's also, I feel like, a misconception that people were not as intelligent. Our IQ, as it differently, maybe how it's measured, like they had an excessive amount of information on the things that they focused on, typically agriculture, how to survive, living, things like that, because it was much more difficult, but they weren't necessarily more dumb. Like when we think of like the Neanderthals and things like that, like they genuinely had a different level of intelligence. But as far as Homo sapiens, we've kind of stayed consistent as far as our ability to grasp concepts around us, like complex concepts. Although we didn't, like you say, have written word, that came with government, like a large amount of people coming together and then having to start delegating and truly working as a community. That's what then caused government, and then government is what then caused the writing. But their intelligence has always been there. But I really do like the way that you brought up as far as the Bronze Age. Like, it's true, like, that you have to really think about this. There's genuine research and development at that stage when it comes to blacksmithing, leatherworking.
Oh, yeah.
All those trades to try to improve, like, not communication, but transportation from location to location is big.
One thing that I would say, because IQ is primarily just discerning like how well you can learn things, I would say that generally the human IQ has not shifted greatly. But a way to tell a peak civilization from a non-peak civilization is their creation of art. Because art is purely, I think the correct word primarily would be holistic. Like, it doesn't serve much else purpose aside from its art. So, like, while making a tool could be considered a form of artwork, the tool doesn't necessarily need a leather sheath, but you might want one. So the leather sheath would be you imbuing time into artisanal practices. So like Homer writing poems is art. And it's not just art because we think it's art. It was art to the ancient Greeks. It was art to the ancient Romans. It was art to the people who could read such things, even in like the Middle Ages, medieval time frame. It became known to the masses again during the Renaissance to a degree. But it stayed art for thousands of years. It was not, even to like, and other cultures will view things differently, but even the Asians would consider what Homer did as art. I can't speak much to other continents. I don't have really any experience with them. But having been in Asia for a time, they still like the ancient Greek poems modernized into movies and things of that nature. And one of my favorite movies, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Okay.
Is based off of the Odyssey. Because what a lot of people forget about is in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes and meets a blind prophet. They meet the blind elderly gentleman on the railroad who's just going down with the cart as a prophet, talking about you will not get the treasure you seek, but you will get a treasure, things of that nature. The Cyclops that Odysseus deals with would have been played by John Goodman, his character in that film being a big fat white Klansman. He was a hysterical character. And then even with the main character meeting back up with his wife and having to fight her new fiance who's bona fide, like, we took an ancient art and modernized it and made the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou based off of the Odyssey. Like, it's cultures that have time to create art have evolved even in their time span to not just worry about living and dying. Because otherwise, like, if you go later into the Middle Ages, post fall of the Roman Empire, everything, like, life gets more difficult after that, and it stays very difficult for a while, until oddly enough the church funds everything to create the Renaissance. People are like, oh, the church. I don't like the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church funded the Renaissance. Like, that's what they did.
I had heard that when it comes to the Renaissance, coffee was a major contributor. It wasn't public, it wasn't something that was common beforehand, but through trade routes and different ways, they were able to then gain that. And instead of people drinking alcohol, because that was the common way, you didn't drink just water. It would be
water was dirty.
Exactly, it would be water with alcohol. So you were always buzzed, essentially.
Yeah,
like you were just walking, you were living life buzzed.
Yeah, people weren't walking around drinking like wine coolers and Budweiser, but all clean beverages for the most part had 1 to 2% alcohol.
Yeah, it needed to.
And that's just what you drank.
Yeah.
You had to clean the water. But yeah, with the introduction of coffee, well, and even not just coffee, but like tea. Part of the reason that tea is so big is because you've got to boil the water first. So when you boil the water, it kills all the bad stuff, and then you make tea, and tea has caffeine in it, naturally occurring. So that helped kick off some of it. More like the introduction with coffee was a little bit later than the Renaissance, because that came from South America. So that was the Spanish exploring into South America in the
1700s? No, 16s.
So, what is it, 14 that the Italian paid by Spain got lost, wound up in the islands. So it would have been the 1500s. Because by the time the English showed up to the North American continent, Native Americans had horses. And it took 100 years for horses to get up into North America from South America and parts of Central America, where the Spanish had conquered in the 1500s. Because everyone shits on the English, and I think it's partially because the Spanish are white, and people don't think of the Spaniards as white people. And they also consequently got very lucky that they lost constantly afterwards. But yeah, the first Europeans to bring horses was in the 1500s. They had proto horses, but it was nothing like what the Europeans had brought over and had tamed, which was why the quote unquote wild horses 100 years later could be tamed again.
Gotcha.
Like if we were to just let dogs go for 100 years, we'd be able to tame them again in 100 years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wolves are still wolves, and they're going to be wolves. But we could retame dogs if we wanted to.
Do you have a specific time frame that is your favorite from history? Not necessarily that you want to live there, just like you like hearing about it, learning about it, or is there one that you really do want to experience?
So, there's a couple, because I've got a little bit of Scandinavian blood in me. I think it would be interesting to like live for a time with like the Scandinavian peoples, because everyone thinks of the Vikings and they're like, oh yeah, all they did was like murder and pillage and rape and shit. And it's like, well, no, they were also farmers, but that's why the Vikings showed up in the wintertime. You can't grow shit in the wintertime. So they would farm throughout the spring and summer, harvest in the fall, and then go a Viking, which is traveling, searching, fighting in the wintertime. That's why they were always wearing pelts and shit, because kill something. They didn't really wear a lot of pelts. They had wool and things of that nature that they could knit together into clothing. They weren't completely barbaric, although some of them would kill bears and then wear the skins. That's where the term berserker comes from. It's the soldiers who wore bear skins. There was another type, I don't remember what they were called, but they wore wolf skins into battle, which is just absolutely terrifying. And I would love to be standing shoulder to shoulder with some of those guys and just live in their society for a while. But if I really had to pick one, it would be something like the American West, post the development of the repeating rifle.
Okay.
Because shoving a ball down a barrel with powder and a patch just does not strike my fancy at all. I've done that. No. I've zero interest in trying to feed myself shoving a ball down a barrel with a patch and some powder, and zero accuracy past 50 yards.
I definitely get that.
Which, oddly enough, could be me living in Montana in 1901. Like, I would not mind that. I would hope that my knowledge of modern vehicles and everything like that ceased existing, because then you'd just be depressed the whole time because you don't have food and a phone and internet.
Yeah.
Like going back from now would just be impossible.
It would be like if we took our bodies and took it to the past, it would be so much more difficult than I think people realize. One is your body isn't like used to that environment, like genuinely by itself.
It's
your
not
gut
acclimated
biome
to the work or the gut biome.
Yeah, like your stomach isn't going to be able to necessarily process everything that they could back then because it's completely different throughout all the years of evolution and change. And our immune system is also very different. The things that we
would be immune to all of the diseases walking around at the time.
Do you think so?
So that's something that is actually laid out in the historical record. While people were still getting smallpox in England and everything like that during the time of our involvement moving into the North American continent, things of that nature, we were getting smallpox and people died of it. But it was very, very minute number of people dying from smallpox by the time we were here.
Mm-hmm.
But if a Native American caught smallpox, they were like 100%.
Yeah.
Like they were going to die.
But I'm saying the strands are different. So like the influenza vaccine and things like that, like it's changed year by year because of what it is. I feel like a lot of the things
that immunity. The immunity would stay with us. So if you were to take your DNA right
but it's
now,
I get what you're saying, but it's a previous strain, like how it changes. You really think so?
Yep.
That's interesting.
That's why while Napoleon was in Egypt, the Black Death was still around in Egypt, and it was still killing people. And he had people that got sick with the Black Death, but they had the medical technology to help them.
Mm.
They did leave a whole bunch of them behind, stole the Rosetta Stone, and fucked back off to France.
Mm.
But it was still ravaging parts of Egypt as it had hundreds of years prior in Europe. But it wasn't in Europe hardly, like at all at that point. So that's something that is very interesting, how the body acclimates. I think a lot of our food, like if you were to start talking about hunting like you were earlier, to just move on to a wild caught diet for the most part, you would be able to then take your year of acclimatizing your body to that wild diet and go back in time and eat that food just fine. Because while our evolutionary tract is very narrow, as far as we can view it, that is something that we are hardier people genetically.
Yeah.
Because of how hardy they were.
Gotcha.
That's why the majority of people in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin are all tall, fat, and stocky. They're descendants of Nordic peoples who were tall, fat, and stocky. And they were built for a colder climate. But they're all pasty ass white. If they're from that area, like genetically, family been there forever, and they burn in the sun like it's going out of style. Because even in the Native American tribes, we think of them all as the quote unquote red man, as they were described. But there were differences. You could look at two different Indians and give an idea of where they were from on the continent.
Mm-hmm.
Because where it's traditionally darker, they were lighter skinned. So like the Seminole Indians of Florida, the unconquered tribe. That's a big joke. I love that joke. They think they were unconquered. They got slaughtered down to like only being hundreds of them. And then they voluntarily walked into the Everglades. I don't know if you've been in the Everglades. The Everglades suck ass.
Yeah, it's a nice hike.
And they sucked ass worse 200 years ago. So it's like, yeah, unconquered tribe voluntarily walked into hell and decided to live there for the rest of their lives. But they were a much darker people than those living in, say, the Minnesota woodlands. Because there's more sun, it's hotter, it's a different, entirely different aspect of life. And they weren't killing like large deer and moose and elk. They were hunting game, rabbits, birds, squirrels, small deer, large dogs, essentially. So you could look at different Native Americans and tell the difference between them, which is really difficult in black and white photography because it doesn't capture gradient worth a shit.
I get that. Is there a time period that you absolutely detest? Like something about it that you are not fond of? You would never want to go to that time period?
Well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the worst year in the world, I think it was like 1539. There were like multiple volcanic eruptions or some nonsense that year. It was incredibly dark and cold. Like sickness was everywhere. It was just a really bad time to be alive.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
I believe it was 1539 was the year. I'd have to go back and look again. But I wouldn't want to live in Europe between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. It was a very hard life. Everything was feudal. Not that it was easy beforehand, but it became a lot less easy afterwards.
Gotcha.
While Rome was no peacekeeper by any stretch, they were to a degree a peacekeeper. They kept a lot of people in line. War was typically only at the fringes. So like if you had to live anywhere near that time period, you would want to live not in Rome, but like maybe within 400 miles of Rome during the height of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Like you're selling your feet to Rome, but you're not getting, there was typically very little fear of anybody coming in and screwing with you aside from the Roman officials.
Gotcha.
Which, hey, the Italians have a way that they do things. They've been doing things that way for centuries. All you got to do is look at New York and Boston, and they still doing shit that way. You're going to get roughed up. You might as well get roughed up by them.
Very well. I get that. All right. I have a totally random question for you, and this might push your historical knowledge. So BC and BCE.
Yep.
It used to be before Christ, and then AD after death is what I had heard. And then they changed it to BC, BCE before Common Era. And then...
Well, it's BCE and CE.
Yes. Thank you. BCE and CE. So before Common Era, then the Common Era. What is the starting point of the Common Era? Like, what does year one CE look like?
So that is actually an interesting one because if you look at it, we're living it in 2025 AD. And if you ask somebody that uses BCE and CE, we're living in 2025 CE. Because it's the exact same time frame. It's just people who are mad at the people who started the naming convention and the calendar count and the year count, which I'm no fan of the Catholic Church, but dear Lord, they got the entire world on one calendar.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive.
And it's like, yeah, we're on the Gregorian calendar and Julian, all that nonsense. Pope Gregory, like that's where it comes from. I think the CE and BCE thing is the classic setup of kids who are mad at their parents. And so they just want to do something to stick it to their parents. And this is one topic that I will agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson on. You're using the exact same time frame and you're changing the words arbitrarily for no reason. Because you're still basing it off the birth and death and life of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've not changed anything. You just wanted a different word. And in the words of my buddy Menzie, that is people standing on the shoulders of giants and pissing on the giants that they're standing on. I am not discovering any new technologies, and I'm living off of technologies that have only been, to a degree, slightly improved upon since the 1900s. The phone that you're recording this on was part of that technology was developed in like the 1940s and 50s. Like, who are we to shit on the people that make things just because we're unhappy that we didn't make it? Like, I'm not out here figuring out how to put nickel and chromium and steel to make stainless.
Yeah.
It's like with like, just because I don't like who did it doesn't mean that I can't like what came of it. But Henry Ford was a Nazi.
Yes.
He was absolutely in favor of Hitler. Ford Automotive still exists.
Mm-hmm.
Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Literally came into existence because of Hitler. He created the brand.
Gotta love Fanta.
Gotta love Fanta. He created Fanta. Well, he told people we need some kind of sugary drink, and that led to the creation of Fanta. But like, that's only because Coca-Cola they didn't hate what Hitler was doing, but they couldn't associate with him.
Yeah.
Because the people at Coca-Cola were Nazis. Like, they weren't good people. Coca-Cola was started by a Southern general, Confederate war general, to get off of painkillers. It's part of the reason it had cocaine in it.
Yep. History is so interesting. Like, there's no reason to watch video game lore when
history
is so interesting.
Have to find someone who's willing to talk about history in a way that makes it entertaining. So, like, the Fat Electrician we talked about last time, he did a video on Coca-Cola. Now, everybody agrees slavery is bad, and everybody today will say that everybody who fought for the Southern Army was just an evil person. And those people, I think, are about as ignorant as you can get. Because the rank and file soldier, I mean, you were in the Navy. Rank and file guy's just a normal dumbass doing what he's told.
Yeah.
Like, we weren't putting the rank and file, because there were two armies in Germany. There was the SS and there was the regular army. We weren't throwing all of the regular army guys up on the Nuremberg trials for following orders. Because following orders, to a degree, is a legitimate thing. The SS weren't allowed to call that card because they were the special service, essentially. Yeah. They were the ones giving out the orders. Like, they weren't just following orders, they were handing them bitches out. But so, like, a Confederate general creates a coca wine using the coca plant with cocaine, the addictive parts still in it, and it'll get you wired. And this alcoholic wine from Europe, and then people start, and that's that way for a while. And then people start talking about like prohibition, even before prohibition was a thing. Like, people were busting down on people drinking. And so he'd made this like syrup that he could mix with water and carbonate. How the hell are you carbonating shit? We don't have compressed tanks and things like that on hand post the Civil War.
Yeah.
We're not making steel tanks for carbonation. But he finds this soda water that he can make, and he can pump air into it, or he can pump CO2 into it and carbonate it and still keep the cocaine. But now he doesn't have to deal with the wine part.
Mm.
Well, now cocaine's an issue. So they take the cocaine out and they replace it with another addictive substance, which should be regulated, not necessarily to the same degree as cocaine, but should be more regulated than it is, called sugar.
Mm.
And you just pour the sugar to it, and it's an addictive chemical,
Yeah.
like any other potentially addictive chemical. And so, but it's like, you don't see people boycotting Coca-Cola because the founder of Coca-Cola was a Confederate, and the people running Coca-Cola in the 30s and 40s were Nazi sympathizers. We're not canceling Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
It's still around. It's still the biggest soda company in the world.
It's a little late to cancel now, I think.
Hey, man, they could try.
For sure they can.
But it's like it started as a way to get him off of painkillers from, like, he got an injury in the war, and so he wanted to get off of painkillers.